Elite Jocks, tier, scholarship student's shirt. Her judo throw sends 200 lub captain skidding 20 feet. You think you've seen every scandal Washington can serve. But in a hushed committee room, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett removed her glasses, leaned forward, and dropped 2 words that shattered the status quo paternity agreement. Behind her lie sealed court files, a $3.1 million payoff to someone known only as TB, and a claim that the president's own son might not be his. Phones lit up, news feeds exploded, and even the West Wing froze in its tracks. What happens when the most protected secret in the nation is ripped into the light? Let's find out. Don't scroll away, smash that subscribe button, hit like if you stand for accountability, and drop your own answer truth wins in the comments. In the next half hour, we'll expose how sealed court files and a $3.1 million hush payment shook the presidency to its core. Fasten your seatbelts. This journey from hidden whispers to explosive revelations starts now. Imagine the marble columns of the Capitol glowing in the early morning light, a silent witness to decades of power plays and whispered deals. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett strides through those halls with a determination most haven't seen before. She's a former defense attorney whose drive to protect the underdog was forged watching her own community dismissed and disregarded. Today she wears a tailored navy blazer instead of a courtroom robe, but the stakes are no less lethal. Just hours ago, the House Oversight Committee was running an hour behind schedule. The gray-haired chairman droned on about budgets and bylaws, and most cameras stayed pointed away from the empty seats as staffers exhaled into coffee cups. But behind the scenes, Crockett's team had been burning midnight oil, preparing to unleash something explosive. They'd secured sealed documents from a 2019 Arizona court files so deeply buried that even many members of Congress didn't know they existed. Files that hinted at a $3.1 million payment to someone identified only as TB, and a paternity agreement that could rewrite the definition of presidential scandal. On one side of the room, Republican representatives exchanged polite nods and half smiles, convinced this was just another procedural hearing. On the other side, a handful of Democrats leaned forward, eyes alight with curiosity, waiting for the moment to pivot from policy points to a bombshell. In the gallery, interns scrolled through headlines on phones, oblivious that history was about to pivot on 2 quiet words. Jasmine's life up to now had been defined by dogged persistence. She grew up in a neighborhood where ambulances were more common than ice cream trucks, where her mother worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. She learned early that truth could be a weapon, but also a shield. That lesson guided her through law school, through cases where the odds were stacked and lost against her clients. It's why when she heard whispers of a court order demanding a DNA test that was never carried out, her pulse didn't quicken with fear. It steadied with purpose. Meanwhile, in the West Wing, an entirely different narrative was spinning. A junior staffer, still half asleep with an iced latte in hand, flicked on a muted TV in the Roosevelt Room. The screen was tiled with committee footage, mundane, until Jasmine removed her glasses and asked for silence. There, frozen in that split second, was the image no one in that building dared acknowledge, the cold resolve of someone who knew secrets about the first family. Back in the committee room, an anxious aide hovered at the back, fingers hovering over a mute button that would never be pressed. A few rows ahead, the chairman's eyebrow rose imperceptibly when the term sealed affidavit slipped from her lips. It was the kind of term meant to drift past public attention, lost in legalese. But when Jasmine spoke of buried payments and a child whose identity was weaponized for political gain, the air crackled. You could almost hear the soft click of cameras shifting zooms, the low hum of brain cells rewiring to register a new conspiracy. Outside news vans idled along Constitution Avenue. Producers furrowed their brows over scripts, unsure whether to cue a live feed. A beat. Then the president's schedule flashed red on the West Wing monitor. Staffers abandoned briefing packets, gathering around the corner TV. The hush that fell wasn't the polite silence of protocol. It was a predator's pause before the hunt. For Jasmine's constituents back home, this was vindication. Texts flooded her phone. "You do the right thing. We need you. Show them they can't bury this. In coffee shops from Austin to Atlanta, baristas paused mid-pour to ask, "Have you heard what she's going to say?" Everyone felt that undercurrent of betrayal, the same one Jasmine carried with her, the betrayal of trust by those sworn to lead. And so, as she approaches the committee table, the weight of those sealed documents isn't just paper and ink. It's the collective fury of a nation that demands accountability. It's the years of being told to sit down, to wait, to be quieter. It's the realization that this moment, electric, fragile, irreversible, isn't about a single politician's fate. It's about whether democracy can still protect the powerless, whether truth can outlast power. In the hush before her words, you can taste the tension. In the beat before she speaks, you can feel the world lean in. Congresswoman Crockett sat forward, voice steady as steel when she spoke the words no one expected. There is a sworn affidavit from a federal contractor. A hush rippled through the chamber, like the calm before a storm. The contractor's job? Digital shredding of White House correspondence, including one file flagged under the White House Correspondence Protection Act. But this file was different. It referenced a $3.1 million payment to an alias only known as TB, alongside a paternity agreement and the ominous phrase DNA confirmation pending. Suddenly, the sterile decor of the hearing room felt charged. Matt Overby's pen slammed onto the desk as he lunged to interrupt. His knuckles-whitened jaw clenched, but Crockett did not flinch. She leaned in so close, her voice felt like a whisper in a cathedral. If the president knew during his first term that Barron Trump was not biologically his, and buried that information to protect his image, we have a problem that's not just legal, it's moral. A collective intake of breath. Committee members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Cell phones slipped out of back pockets, screens lighting up like beacons. Eleanor Vance tried to pivot, muttering something about keeping the child out of the fray, but Crockett cut her off mid-sentence. "You want to protect a child, then stop using him as a prop for power." Her words landed like a hammer blow. No clatter, just a single heavy thud. Crockett's colleagues on the Democratic side exchanged glances that said more than any applause could. They'd been waiting for this moment, watching the gears of cover-ups grind beneath layers of protocol. Yet even they seemed surprised at the impact. Across the aisle, 30 sets of eyes now bore witness. Every camera in the room dipped lower, focusing on the silver-haired judge whispering into his mic. Every reporter's finger hovered above the live stream button. Out in the hall, newsrooms exploded. CNN cut to live coverage, MSNBC followed suit, and even Fox News reluctantly tuned in. In the gallery, interns and staffers clustered around phones. TikTok clips began popping up within seconds, each one carrying the same incredulous caption. Did she just say Barron isn't Trump's son? Back in the chamber. Overby fumbled for order. He rapped his gavel so hard the wood echoed. "Order, this hearing is adjourned," he barked, but Crockett raised her voice for the first time in the day, and it rang with the force of conviction. "We will not silence the truth, because it makes the powerful uncomfortable." Chaos ensued. Microphones fizzed. Staffers scrambled to mute feeds. One aide yanked cables from the committee's AV rack, plunging the live broadcast into dead air for over 3 minutes. The sudden blackout felt like a betrayal. Viewers online assumed a technical glitch at first, until an anonymous user leaked the uncut raw feed. The entire world saw the moment when Crockett slid a photocopy across the desk, zooming in on the line, "Paternity agreement enforced under non-disclosure." Meanwhile, the White House was convulsing. In the Roosevelt room, a junior staffer spilled iced coffee over a printer, yet nobody noticed. All eyes were fixed on a muted flat screen. Chief of Staff Brian Halford hovered by the door, half expecting to be summoned to explain the unexplainable. President Trump stepped in from a trade briefing, hair-frazzled red tie askew. His stare locked onto the TV. Crockett's face filled the screen, eyes cold, unwavering. "What is this?" he barked, voice slicing the silence. "Why is this on every channel?" A beat passed as aides scrambled. Phones were yanked from desks. An intern bolted from the room to place an emergency call to CNN. Voice assistants lit up with urgent requests. "Put me through to Peterson now," Trump commanded. Sir Halford began, voice measured. "She's alleging that Barron isn't your son, and that there's a $3.1 million payoff. Sealed documents from 2019. Trump's face contorted, caught between disbelief and fury. His hand quivered as he snatched up the remote and slammed it back onto the table. The click of the volume button echoed like a pistol shot. The room held its breath as the feed sputtered back to life, catching Crockett's final words. "This isn't gossip. It's justice manipulated for personal protection." The president's eyes narrowed. He walked toward the screen, jaw working. "This is slander," he spat into his phone. "Get me Hope Sinclair?" Within seconds, his personal counsel was patching in. Her voice, calm but firm, rattled his last defenses. "Sir, defamation law won't stick if it turns out to be true." Silence. An aide offered a crisis update. Every outlet's picked it up. "Not his son is trending worldwide. We can't bury this." In the committee room, the hearing finally resumed after a 22-minute hiatus, but the fire had burned through the hinges. Members weren't debating policy anymore. They were scrambling for cover. Some refused to meet Crockett's gaze. Others slipped out in whispers. In that moment, power seemed to tremble under its own weight. But Crockett remained unshaken. A text lit her phone just as she passed through the hallway, one word glowing against the dark screen finally. Across town, veteran journalist Conrad Wells leaned back in his squeaky chair in a St. Louis newsroom. He'd been tracking Trump's financial maneuvers for years, offshore trusts, shell companies, hush money leaks. Yet nothing had prepared him for the seismic shock of paternity agreement. His fingertips danced across the keyboard as he cross-referenced a buried Maricopa County docket, TB versus JDT, sealed in 2019, affidavit attached, then withdrawn. A wire transfer from a Trump-linked LLC named Red Lantern Diagnostics, labeled medical testing services, blinked back at him. "This is beyond scandal," he whispered to himself. "It's systemic abuse of power." Within hours, Wells had pieced together a money trail, a timeline, and an angle no one else had. He shot off an email to Crockett's office. "I know about Red Lantern. If it's real, this is bigger than politics." As evening fell, audiences across the nation were no longer asking if Crockett was telling the truth. They were asking how it had stayed secret so long. In diners from Des Moines to Dallas, debates erupted. What if it's true? Why refuse a DNA test? Can we still trust the presidency? Meanwhile, inside 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, panic gave way to panic. Sinclair combed through every shred of legalese she could find. Halford convened around-the-clock strategy sessions. Staffers crammed briefing packets that never got red-wiped and rewrote talking points 10 times an hour. Each new leak, an internal memo, a staff voicemail, felt like water pouring into a sinking ship. The question on everyone's lips: who leaked the sealed affidavit? But as the White House hunkered down, credibility cratered. Fox anchors hesitated before discussing Crockett's claims. Republican strategists on CNN admitted off the record that the administration's response looked desperate. Independent voters, already skeptical, began shifting toward the honesty faction. Back in the Capitol, Jasmine Crockett prepared for her next move. She met secretly with legal counsel, eyes unwavering as they plotted the public release of full court filings. Her constituents had texts flooding in. "You gave voice to our outrage. Thank you for fighting. No more buried secrets." From a quiet corner of the hearing building, you could almost feel the tectonic plates of Washington shifting. A new question hung in the air. Could the presidency survive the unearthing of its deepest secret? Or would the truth, once released, prove that no amount of power, money, or legal maneuvering could keep democracy from demanding accountability? And as cameras panned out, the final image of this chapter froze on Jasmine Crockett's resolute face. Eyes cold, purpose radiant, reminding the nation that sometimes the most explosive crises begin with a single unstoppable question. Who really owns the truth? She stepped out of the hearing room, and the corridor lights snapped on around her like a halo. Her phone buzzed, incoming message, one word. Finally. No name. No icons, just that single promise. In that instant, Jasmine Crockett knew the struggle had shifted. This was no longer about pressing an advantage. It was about seizing a moment and never letting go. Back in her office, the hush fell thick. Her team gathered around a narrow conference table, eyes bright with adrenaline. On the table lay a stack of photocopies, the sealed court filings, the affidavit, the $3.1 million transaction record, and the paternity agreement itself, each page a piece of evidence that could either spark reform or explode into chaos. Crockett tapped a page with calm ferocity. "They thought we'd back down after the cameras cut," she said. "Now we go all the way." First, they needed control of the narrative. A discreet press advisory went out to a handful of trusted outlets, public records, motion to unseal additional documents, details to follow by midnight. The language was surgical national interest, ethical governance, executive privilege breach. No emotional hedging, no loaded adjectives, just the bare truth dressed in legal precision. It was a message to every newsroom: if you want the story straight from the source, you come to us. Next, Crockett arranged a closed-door briefing with key committee members, some swing district Republicans who had shown unease, some freshman Democrats hungry for a real fight. In that room, lights dimmed over projection screens. They walked through the timeline. 2019 Red Lantern Diagnostics, November DNA request, December dismissal motion, February private settlement. She paused on the slide showing the wire transfer, then met each person's gaze. "This isn't rumor. These are bank records and court orders. We have to decide, do we protect a legacy or protect democracy?" Their nods were subtle but unanimous. The plan crystallized within 48 hours. File a motion with the House Ethics Committee, notify the Department of Justice, and publicly release the unredacted affidavit. Simultaneously lock down interviews with key figures like Genevieve Larson, the woman behind TB on her terms in controlled settings. No ambushes, no ambivalence. A written statement, first voice of the whistleblower, then the Congresswoman's official remarks. But they weren't naive. They knew the White House would hit back. So step 3 was defensive, preemptive FOIA requests for any related communications subpoenas drafted for phone logs and a parallel legal team ready to counter any defamation suits. Every email, every draft motion, every phone call would be time-stamped and archived. No backdoors, no ambiguity. If the fight moved to the courts, Crockett's camp would be ready. That evening, the public moment arrived. As the sun dipped below the Capitol dome, she posted a single tweet. No fanfare, no coy emojis, just tomorrow. The full record goes public. Truth has no expiration. Minutes later, "Your truth has no expiry" began to climb trending charts. It felt like lighting a fuse inside a powder keg. Inside the West Wing, panic flared. Phones blared alerts, motion filed, affidavit, unredacted, depositions scheduled. Chief of Staff Halford slammed a binder on a table. "We thought this was contained," he snapped. But Crockett's plan had already metastasized beyond their control. The controlled release of facts meant social media, cable news, and public opinion would unfold on her timeline, not theirs. Meanwhile, in living rooms across the country, viewers braced themselves. One clip showed her team briefing reporters in a tan-lit committee room. Another showed a black and white PDF of the paternity agreement floating onto laptops in real time. The contrast could not have been starker: transparency versus secrecy. Barrel-chested muscle car owners in Tulsa paused their Saturday barbecues to reload firewalled documents. College students gathered in library commons, phones propped up on textbooks. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett remained composed. She reviewed talking points one last time, emphasize moral stakes, highlight public trust, frame it as a test of American values. No bombast, just unvarnished clarity. She would not rant. She would state fact after fact until the edifice of denial crumbled under its own weight. When dawn broke, the largest news organizations carried banner headlines: unredacted affidavit, the full story behind TB, and $3.1 million and paternity agreement exposed: power versus accountability. That morning on the Capitol steps, Crockett walked out alone, the filing in a manila folder clutched at her side. Camera shutters rattled like gunfire. She placed the folder on a simple podium, cleared her throat, and began. My constituents sent me here to hold power accountable. Yesterday I presented sealed documents that have been kept from the American people for 6 years. Today I deliver the full record, no redactions, no half-truths. What you will read is not conjecture. It is the work of our justice system and our financial institutions laid bare. As she spoke, clips of her voice echoed on news feeds worldwide. In the East Room of the White House, aides stared at television monitors as if hypnotized. The president's schedule evaporated. The sinusoidal tensions of trade talks dissipated into static. One by one, senior staffers realized there was no pivot, no salvage. The plan had worked. Truth would now outrank any defense. By late afternoon, bipartisan murmurs rippled through Congress. Calls for hearings on executive privilege misuse questions about sealing court records, fresh subpoenas for Trump administration emails. The ripple became a wave. And at the epicenter stood Jasmine Crockett, once a little-known representative from Dallas, now the face of an uprising against secrecy. Her revenge wasn't vengeance in blood. It was vengeance in transparency. She didn't humiliate an enemy with insults or tarnish them with lies. She showed their own documents, their own signature, their own money trail. It was simple and devastating. Turn the mirror around and let power see itself. When the dust settled, the halls of power had been tested, and truth for once demanded to be heard. And though the battle was far from over, the blueprint for holding leaders to account had been written in black and white. The nation had witnessed a new kind of justice, cold, precise, unstoppable, and behind it walked one woman who refused to look away. The morning the files went live, the world erupted in fragments of PDFs and flashing headlines. At 8:03 a.m., Jasmine Crockett's office hit send on 3 secure emails, one to the House Ethics Committee, one to the DOJ, and one to a curated list of 10 major news outlets. Each message carried a single attachment: the unredacted affidavit, the paternity agreement, and the bank transfer records. Within seconds, encrypted alerts pinged back, received. By 8:15 a.m., the New York Times front-page widget lit up: affidavit unsealed, Trump's $3.1 million hush payment exposed. Simultaneously, CNN cut to an emergency edition. Their chyron read, Congress unveils secret Trump documents. In a control room 50 miles south, engineers dropped everything. Producers barked for live feeds. Anderson Cooper's voice tremored with the urgency of breaking news. We have the full record, every page raw, unfiltered. Back at Crockett's campaign headquarters, a low-lit bullpen buzzed with triumph. Analysts tracked the hashtag #TruthUnlocked, which soared to #1 worldwide on Twitter. Their dashboard glowed: 500,000 mentions in 10 minutes, 2 million impressions in 30. The team let out breaths they'd held since January. At 9:00 a.m., Genevieve Larson's written statement arrived via an encrypted Dropbox link. She'd kept her promise: no cameras, no glare. The 4-paragraph letter began, I did not come forward for fame or fortune. I came forward for my son and for the truth. She detailed signing the paternity agreement under the alias Talia Breyer, described the DNA order that was never fulfilled, and confirmed the sequence of legal motions that had buried her plea. It was calm, somber, unassailable. News outlets splashed her words in bold headlines: My silence protected the wrong people. A minute later, veteran reporter Conrad Wells hit publish on his embargoed article at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. He led with a line that sliced through the noise: power fears the truth more than defeat. He laid out the red lantern diagnostics wire, transfer the sealed docket, TB vs. JDT, and the chain of custody for the unexecuted DNA test. His narrative wove financial facts into moral urgency. By 10 a.m., the Post-Dispatch site groaned under unprecedented traffic and social shares. In parallel, Jasmine sat for an exclusive pre-recorded interview with MSNBC's Rachel Maddow. Without theatrics, Maddow asked, Did you anticipate this level of chaos? Jasmine replied in measured tones. They counted on belated outrage. We chose decisive action. Clips from that interview began spinning on loop, her calm steeliness, a stark contrast to the White House's panicked scrambling. The White House response was a flurry of memos and half-baked talking points. Their official statement called Crockett's filings a politically motivated ambush and labeled the documents mischaracterized. But no one cited specifics. Every rebuttal ran headlong into the public record. Journalists on Fox News, forced to cover the story, stumbled over their own skepticism. When pressed about the existence of the documents, they fell silent. By midday, small climaxes unfolded everywhere. In a Florida diner, a retired Marine demanded the waitress replay the affidavit audio on his phone. In a dorm wing at the University of Washington, students crowded around a laptop, pausing, then cheering when they saw the pages bearing Trump's signature. In a suburban kitchen in Pennsylvania, a mother explained to her teenager why executive privilege could no longer shield a president from accountability. Meanwhile, Crockett's legal team quietly filed 2 FOIA lawsuits against the National Archives and the Department of Justice, demanding every related memo and email. At the same time, they slipped subpoenas into the committee's agenda for internal White House communication logs. By stacking legal pressure from multiple angles, they guaranteed no backroom deals could stem the tide. At 2 p.m., Fox anchor Brett Baier invited a panel of Republican operatives to discuss Crockett's coup. One strategist admitted off-camera, "If these documents are real, there's no spin strong enough to counteract them." His admission, captured on a hot mic, became the day's second viral moment. By 3 p.m., angry calls flooded Trump's private office. Donors complained. Wall Street sent cautious signals. Independent voters tweeted frustration. The Dow dipped. Major advertisers on cable networks paused at buys around Trump programming. Inside the Capitol, key Republicans who'd previously criticized the investigation quietly expressed concern to staffers. 3 members called for an emergency caucus meeting to assess the ramifications of sealed executive actions. As the sun sank toward the horizon, the final crescendo approached. At 5:30 p.m., Jasmine Crockett emerged from a private meeting with the Judiciary Committee's chairs. Cameras snapped as she walked to the podium outside the Cannon House office building. Her face was calm but resolute, her shoulders squared against the wind. She placed the affidavit on the lectern and spoke in a voice both firm and compassionate. Today we have lifted the veil on the most protected secret in this nation. These documents prove that nobody, not even the president, is above the truth. I call on my colleagues, Democrat and Republican alike, to stand here and tell the American people why these events were hidden for 6 years. If there is nothing to hide, there should be nothing to fear. At that instant, live streams captured the moment in real time. Viewers watched elected officials shuffle uncomfortably, eyes downcast. Some left the dais, others peered at their phones. The contrast couldn't be more pronounced, one woman's unwavering gaze against dozens of averted stares. Within an hour, independent outlets published side-by-side comparisons of redacted versus unredacted versions, highlighting every strike-through that once obscured the truth. Civic groups filed petitions for a special inquiry. Legal scholars penned op-eds about executive overreach. Even late-night comedy shows previously dismissive of partisan scandals turned serious in their monologues. Tonight we learned that the biggest hush money scandal in American history involved a president paying $3.1 million not to a porn star, but to silence a court-ordered paternity test. As dusk settled over Washington, the halls of power had irrevocably shifted. The documents were out, the world had seen them, and every attempt to bury the story had only deepened its impact. Jasmine Crockett's revenge was not vengeance for its own sake. It was the methodical, unflinching execution of a plan to restore accountability. And in that unfolding aftermath, the American people witnessed a new standard. When power hides behind secrecy, expose it with unassailable facts. When the mighty refuse transparency, meet them with the full weight of the law. When democracy itself trembles, stand firm and demand the truth. The day's final image, a lone folder on a committee table, its contents sprawled across headlines worldwide. Proof that justice once set in motion cannot be contained. And then the ripple became a wave. Within hours, bipartisan whispers in the Capitol turned into public declarations. 3 Republican committee members, once silent, issued statements demanding an independent review of how and why those paternity documents were buried. The House Ethics Committee announced it would fast-track its investigation, promising transparency in the spirit of restoring public trust. Across the country, the headlines told the story at a glance. Sealed affidavit forces congressional reckoning, White House under scrutiny for hidden paternity order, democracy versus secrecy. Even traditionally reserved outlets ran front-page editorials decrying the abuse of executive privilege. On social media, viewers felt vindicated. Shutterst. Truth Unlocked became a rallying cry shared by teachers in classrooms, activists organizing town hall meetings, and even corporate executives tweeting accountability matters more than loyalty. In a suburban living room in Michigan, a grandfather turned off the TV and said to his grandchildren, "This is how democracy works. When one person speaks, millions listen." The TB affidavit, the very document meant to vanish, now sat in the public record, its pages tweeted, annotated, debated. News aggregators ran side-by-side comparisons of the original sealed filings and the newly unredacted versions, magnifying every line where the administration had tried to conceal facts. In the White House, panic ceded to damage control. Press briefings were flooded with unprecedented questions. Why did you refuse the DNA test? Who authorized the sealing of this court order? Will you comply with subpoenas? Each answer a deflection, a partial acknowledgement, a flat denial only fanned the flames. Polling data released that evening revealed a 7-point drop in approval among independents, with 62% now saying the president's actions undermined their faith in government. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett stood on the steps of the Capitol, again flanked by constituents who had sent emails, made calls, and organized Freedom of Information requests. She held nothing back. We forced the truth into the light, and the power that thought itself above scrutiny is now under the microscope it created. Her voice was calm, but the applause that followed felt like thunder. Legislative fallout began immediately. 2 new bills were introduced to limit executive authority to seal court records and to require any motion to bury a document under executive privilege be approved by a federal judge in open session. Coyotes in Washington whispered that these measures would likely pass with broad bipartisan support, proof that public outrage could translate into lasting reform. At local levels, the story sparked civic engagement. Voter registration drives spiked in swing districts. Petitions circulated demanding hearings in state legislatures. Law professors held emergency seminars on constitutional checks and balances. In cafes from Portland to Philadelphia, patrons argued fiercely about what transparency really meant, but agreed on one point: never again should sealed documents protect a private pact at the expense of public truth.